We have Katina Pollock, as you know, she's a professor at the Faculty of Education, and Virginia Tucker, who works with Katina. This workshop today is a really fantastic opportunity for researchers, I think. As you might be aware, Tribe Council and other kinds of funders just keep raising the bar in terms of what they expect in terms of knowledge mobilization. Katina is a real expert in that area because it's the focus of her research. But also Katina has sat on the panel that adjudicates her insight grants. So she's seen the review of research proposals, including knowledge mobilization plans, from the side of the people who are deciding to give us or not give us money. Right? So I'll turn things over to Katina and Virginia.
Thank you, Perry. So in a moment, I will have a mic. Hopefully you can all hear me. And if not, bear with me till we actually get a sound system going here. So as Perry just mentioned, I'm Dr. Katina Pollock, and I'm in the Seahills group. And Virginia Tucker is around the corner here, not doing anything she shouldn't be doing, but so, and Kelly Bairos was supposed to be here with us today, but unfortunately she's had a small emergency that she take care of at home, and she sends her regrets, although she's here virtually with you, and I mean virtually by online and all those other kinds of things. Myself, Kelly, and Virginia come to you through our experience in a knowledge mobilization initiative that the provincial government has funded for many years. And it's with that lens that we share information with you today. The overview of the workshop. We're hoping to, in Cole's notes, describe and define knowledge mobilization, talk about it through a very brief example of a research project, and then demonstrate how you can start thinking about a knowledge mobilization plan. One of the things that before we start, is we talked about how we were going to organize this workshop. And this workshop is meant for people who are thinking, who are academics or people who support academics in thinking about the SSHRC Insight Development Grant, an Insight Grant, Partnership Grant, Connection Grant. That has been our focus, because first we were starting to put this together, we were like, okay, so we want to think about NSERC, we want to think about CIHR, because the parameters around the use and sharing and the co-production of knowledge is somewhat different depending on the funder, and we felt the majority of the people attending today were thinking about, involved in, and connected to SSHRC, and so that's why we framed it in the way that we have. So hopefully you'll be able to see those connections. And in your folder, we have some information that has come from SSHRC that we'll be referring to every once in a while. We also have a copy of the slides for you. Oh, that's good. So, yeah, let's move to the next one. These three questions are going to drive some of the activities we're going to do in about 30 minutes. And we would like for you to take about 4 or 5 minutes, and think about these questions. Now, I realize that some of you are not necessarily principal investigators of research, but support research. So I would like for you to think about a research initiative, or a project, or a fund, or a grant that's been recently received, and answer these questions. For those of you who are thinking about applying for research, then these questions are for you. Or if you're thinking about your research agenda, please use that lens. So why do you do this research? And as I said, for somebody, not just for fun because you like doing research, because somebody said that to me. No, we want a different context of that. Why is this research important? And who this research benefit? You can just take on your sheet, your handout, it's the second one on the left-hand side. It has those questions for you. And I'm wondering if you could just take a moment to think about that. And if some of you are starting from scratch, this might be just a hypothetical situation where it may be, why do you do this research? It could be because I really care about pets. And, who is this Why is this research important? Because there's a lot of animal abuse. You know, you can write it actually make it up as well. It's about the strategies and thinking about it that we want to get to.
Hello? Yeah. Hello?
You take it out. You mute it. Just this more push.
Okay. And if you can't hear me, we'll just. Hi.
This.
I think everyone's finished, most everybody's finished. Thank you. I'm gonna, hopefully this will be at the forefront of your mind as we continue on. So we're going to do an overview of knowledge mobilization. And what I would say is that knowledge mobilization is not necessarily something new. There are many researchers and academics that have been doing knowledge mobilization for many, many years. I would argue that in many ways, there's now been a formal label to it. There's been some more, there's been more research and reflection about it, more writing about it in the academic community. So some of you will sit here today and you will look and see things and say to yourself, you know, I've been doing this for a decade, or I was hoping to do this, and I thought this was only what academics do. And those of you that support research will say, we've been doing this for a while. But now, in some ways, kind of labeling it and making it intentional. And the reason why I say that is because in reviewing the SSHRC Insights grants, it was very clear that the knowledge mobilization plans that were presented often, not all of them, but many of them were somewhat afterthoughts. And while I'm not like to adjudicate people I know, I also know of people in the field, and I knew that they were doing things that were considered knowledge mobilization, but it was not included in their application. So it's not because people don't know how to do it or don't know about it. It's sometimes it's like breathing and eating, and they don't think about including it. So first, what do we mean by knowledge mobilization? This is taken directly from the SSHRC 2018 application website, and it's done. Knowledge mobilization is an umbrella term encompassing a wide range of activities relating to the production and use of research results, including knowledge synthesis, dissemination, transfer, exchange, and co-creation or co-production by researchers and knowledge users. This has changed over the last decade. It has changed a number of times, and I can probably guarantee dollars to donuts it will be probably different in 2019 or maybe 2020, because it keeps changing as SSHRC thinks and reflects on how they understand knowledge mobilization. Also, one of the things I want to share is that there are lots of other connected terms to knowledge mobilization. I like to argue and say that knowledge mobilization is an umbrella term. And knowledge mobilization takes in many of these terms that you will see. Many of these terms are discipline specific. Some are used more often in other disciplines than in education, but we like to include all of them because in education we often cross over to other disciplines as well. I wanted to highlight the first four. Knowledge mobilization is fairly explanatory. There is an argument to be made that the production of knowledge and understanding and, quote, traditional research has increased exponentially, and we now have intermediaries, brokers, organizations, branches, offices, officers, and workers that try to manage knowledge. Knowledge transfer is specifically that. It's usually found in business, HR. In the UK, that you can actually get certificates and degrees in knowledge transfer, and it's the idea of actually how to best transfer information from one place to another. It's usually unidirectional. Knowledge exchange is actually the bidirectional efforts to try to share information. Knowledge translation is actually thinking about bodies of knowledge and how to present it to different audiences in different language so that it is clear. I would also like to say knowledge mobilization, I would argue for SSHRC, if we're thinking about what is knowledge mobilization, it is a tool for SSHRC to fulfill its mission and vision and goals. And I think that's going to be the next slide now. Yeah. Or why? Okay, why mobilize knowledge? This was a question that was presented a long time ago in many places, but I remember sitting in on a conference one time before I was even involved in any of this, and somebody behind said, "So, why knowledge mobilization? Why now? Who cares?" It wasn't talked like that, but it was sort of, being dismissive. Why would we want to think about this? And I thought the presenter had some really great ideas, and I've thought a lot about this because there has to be purpose for doing knowledge mobilization. I think there are a number of drivers, and one is that the generators of research are diverse. There are research is happening not just in academic institutions. It is happening in many places. And in some instances, this research doesn't always have an audience, and it may be research that could be really helpful for academics. But there are also places where some of the research can also be skewed because it's funded by particular interest groups that want to have particular kinds of outcomes for particular kinds of decision making. So what some academic institutions have understood is that there's been a lot of knowledge production, and research findings and evidence created, but not necessarily used. And so the idea is that we need to think intentionally about how we can connect to those that we may want to connect with about a body of research or our findings. There's also global competitiveness. And in the knowledge economy and the age of information and instant ways that we can connect to information, there's a lot of competition in trying to have, to share, have a presence and an acknowledgement of what exists out there. Also connected, as I said, advancements in information communication technology. We can now, there are some researchers in some fields now who publish their preliminary findings on blogs to share with their academic community and whoever their audience may be before they even go to peer review production. There's a whole debate about whether that should happen or not, but it's happening. And so the idea is thinking about ways that we can share our information that may be peer reviewed to reach a larger, broader audience, and that is through social media and other kinds of advances in information communication technology. So to be clear, social media can be for some a part of the information communication technology and advancement, but there are other kinds of things beyond social media, just so that you know that. I'm not sure many of you do know that, because sometimes when we talk about using information communication technology, people are like, well, I don't want a Twitter, I don't want to go to Twitter, but it's more than that. It's not just those media platforms. And we're in a knowledge economy where evidence-informed decisions, or I'm not sure if we are anymore, but it depends. One could argue we may not be, because in the age of, anyway, we won't do it. So anyway, I'll just keep with this. We're in a knowledge economy. We like to think that some of our evidence is used to inform decisions. Not that all decisions have to be evidence-based, because there are some really important moral, really important decisions that need to be made that will not necessarily have evidence to help inform it, but in many situations there are. And the research use gap is widening. As I said, there's a huge generating of research which may not necessarily be taken up in meaningful ways. In the health field, where they look at knowledge transfer and knowledge translation, I think the last steps indicated that research findings today are, after 10 years time, so research findings 10 years ago, measured today, have only been taken up about 20%. And some of these are things that deal with diagnosis and treatment, things that are time sensitive. So the push is to make sure that, or to try to encourage the closing of this gap. Okay, enough about that. So, what do we mean by traditional dissemination and knowledge mobilization? So, in traditional dissemination, it's usually sharing the findings within the academic community only. In higher education institutions like universities, academics are encouraged mainly to only do that. I mean, that's what mainly we're evaluating on our annual performance evaluations. In knowledge mobilization, it's sharing those findings beyond that, so beyond the academic community, with stakeholders and possibly end users such as educators. And I use end users in a very loose term because knowledge mobilization, as you'll see in a moment, is really about co-production and co-creation, so that there may be just end users, but the hope is that there will be people and stakeholders included throughout, and you'll see in a moment. Often research is done to someone, or is on or about someone or something or some phenomena. It's one of the more scientific traditional notions of you do research on or about something, not necessarily with or in collaboration. And knowledge mobilization, the intention is to push people to think about collaboration and working with. The narrow notion of impact or influence, peer-reviewed publications, citation counts, whereas there's a broader notion of impact, and one example is, through more technical language, those kinds of things. The sharing of information in dissemination is usually non-interactive, in the sense that something's published, it is in a non-interactive state until somebody reads it, but that person who reads it may not necessarily connect to the author. In knowledge mobilization, there is an intention of sharing information that is interactive, that targets interactions through networks and partnerships and with intermediaries. In traditional, it's usually one-way movement. Producer produces something, and it's then packaged up in different kinds of ways to something else. While in knowledge mobilization, the movement is to go from push-pull kinds of models to more interactive and systems approaches. And lastly but not least, for researchers, it's usually traditional dissemination is around one study, whereas knowledge mobilization is about the use of a body of knowledge or body of research. So in SSHRC, the why. So SSHRC, this is SSHRC's their mission. I highlighted the pieces that are kind of connected to knowledge mobilization. So meeting the challenges of the 21st century, understanding that can help change the world. Also, it's about, when we talk about developing talent, generating insights and force connections across campuses. Is it force? I'm hoping that's a spell check. Ensuring a better future for Canada and the world. And we're certainly not trying to force you to do it. The reason why we included that, again, as I say, is because knowledge mobilization is one of the tools that SSHRC is using and thinking about in the way to meet its mission. And hopefully you'll see that in a moment. And you'll see it at the very end of your pile of printouts is a SSHRC Insight Development Evaluation Final Report. And you can see how it has the traditional dissemination in it. It talks about, how many peer-reviewed articles, book chapters, those kinds of things. But it also asks about all the other kinds of things that are connected to knowledge mobilization. That, who knew? If I had that when I started my SSHRC Insight Development Grant, I think I would have done more work around knowledge mobilization. But it certainly informed me when I applied for my SSHRC Insight Grant. I'm like, this, and now to be fair, this evaluation is a few years old, so it may have been changed again, but it kind of gives you a flavor of the things that people would be looking for, not people, SSHRC would be looking for in its final report from recipients of the SSHRC. All right, okay, so very quickly, what does this all mean? So I'm just going to try to do a Coles Notes version of what and this is a study. Please remember, knowledge mobilization is meant to be contributing to a body of knowledge and then mobilizing that body of knowledge, not necessarily one study. Because I think that can be a little dicey when we're thinking about saying that a person's set of findings for one particular study is going to solve a particular issue. We all know that it's not necessarily the case, but it does build on a body of research, and mobilizing that is I think, what's important and responsible. So I'm just going to take a study that I did a few years ago on the changing nature of principles work, and it's completed. It's a few years old, and I'm going to start with my why, because in a moment when you start looking at your pen, you're going to start with your why. And so when I applied for my first SSHRC Insight Development Grant, I did not receive the funding. And in the feedback, one of the things that was asked was, why do you want to do this? It seems to be quite broad. And I really thought about, so why do I want to do this study? And I realized that maybe I needed to seek funding from somebody else. But my why was about teaching in a professional master's program with all sorts of principals who are practitioners, and trying to share with them recent research about how particular practices may support them in the work that they do, and many of them saying, we don't think that this would work for us, it doesn't connect to what we're doing. And I thought, well, why is this the case? Why does this happen? So these were the reasons why, and I wanted my research to support principals' practices, to improve the school system, and indirectly to increase or improve student success. So those were my whys. And I started with an intermediary, a knowledge broker, which is the Ontario Principals Association. My KMb goals were obviously to generate awareness of and interest in my research findings. I had a goal because I wanted to get a SSHRC Insight Development Grant, and in some ways, this was sort of my pilot, and I wanted some evidence to demonstrate that I wasn't, talking out of my head, that this was important. I wanted to motivate policymakers and practitioners and scholars to consider the findings, to inform policy and practice, and eventually, from my findings, I wanted to share and work with practitioners and researchers about finding strategies to cope with work intensification and wellness. So, who are my stakeholders? For this study and almost all of my research, my stakeholders are the provincial government, professional principal associations, principals, and aspiring principals. That's really important because I had to think about that at the end, and you'll see why in a minute. Ontario Principals Council, that's what OPC stands for. I approached a number of them, and this was the association that seemed to be most interested. They have a large membership. They have resources, both financial, they have direct access to principals, and they have political influence to a degree. The partnership participation, they helped me recruit principals for focus groups. They helped me, we worked together on the survey instrument. And this was really important because I was using particular language from the academic world in the field, and I was using words where I thought, and then when we had discussions back and forth, they were like, principals aren't going to understand what this means and what that means. And by the way, we don't call ourselves administrators anymore, they're called principals. And that was a political move that had been done about 10 years ago. I didn't know. And of course, I quickly changed that because that would not have been viewed well in the field when we were asking people to actually do the survey. They provided an email list for online the survey program that was approved for ethics, so that I didn't have to try to search for those because there was already a list available. And it allowed utilization of their communication strategy. They already had a president's message that went every Monday. They have a magazine they published to over 6,000 members, and not even members, I should say, because it's globally recognized. They have a website and a Twitter account. And on Wednesdays, they have a professional learning memo. So that's really important because I didn't have to do any of that. I just had to create the content for it. They also really engaged in troubleshooting where necessary. And those troubleshooting moments came up at very unusual and awkward times. And they were involved in data analysis in the sense of sometimes we found anomalies in our statistical work and some of the trends we saw, and they were able to shed some light on what may be happening in particular, or in the field at that time for that year. Thank you. So, my message around knowledge mobilization and what I found from the study I did and the research that I did to support the study was that work intensification works in the education, exists for education professionals. Work intensification is not anything new. It works in different sectors, it exists in different sectors, has not always been recognized in professions. And this was where we were seeing the extension of this phenomenon. There was a disconnect between what the provincial government was conveying to the field and to the public in their policies and then what was happening on the ground. So there was a high expectation of compliance for principals and little room for autonomy. Principals had limited instructional leadership occurring. They were under stress, and the nature of the work is changing. So these were some of the messages that I wanted to share. What I realized, and this is my journey around knowledge mobilization, was that these were findings that I shouldn't probably just be saying the findings. I should be also talking about what do we think of those? What are some is this individuals' experiences? What are some strategies and supports we can put in place for these? So, my research findings supported a growing body of research that, and I want to be clear about that because I didn't necessarily want people to be making provincial policy around a study. Well, it was a study of an entire population. We had over 2,600 survey participants out of a population of almost 6,000. So we were good. We were more than 50%. And this is what I wanted. This is how my research contributed to a body of research. Okay, so, and for my stakeholders, Kelly asked me a while ago, messaging is different for different stakeholders. So as I mentioned, my stakeholders were provincial government, professional associations, active principals, and aspiring principals. So when she said, well, which message goes with which, I had this slide is about a year or two old, and I tried to divide it up based on my audience, but really I wanted them all to know this, and maybe how it impacted them might be different. Okay, so knowledge, products, and strategies. Sometimes it makes me cringe. We go back and forth. Should be knowledge, strategies, and products, and then it's like, well, we need to think about which comes first, the chicken or the egg. And the reason why I say that is because in our past experience, in one of our other initiatives, we found that very enthusiastic research individuals, groups of researchers, practitioners, intermediaries, and organizations went to town on creating products, but hadn't really connected them to any kind of strategy. Or they were products that there was no real connection from one product to another, and the use of the product was not clear. And in the growing research around knowledge mobilization, they're very specific and intentional about thinking about products and strategies together. And I almost feel like it should be called pro-strategies or something, like, you can pull them together, because we're like back and forth. Is it strategies and products, or is products and strategies, or there needs to be a word that like pulls the two of them together. It's like, it's like when we do the meshing of names, but we haven't come up with anything yet. So, very quickly, just trying to make sure I have all my notes here, because Kelly comes in at certain times, and now I have to take on her role as well, which, it's big boots to fill. So, some of the products generated, and many of you do this already, but I'm just listing them off very quickly, and I try to do it from first our traditional academic dissemination area, right? So we do conference papers and presentations, we do peer review academic articles, special issue journals, we probably have a study report. After the study report, it starts getting into things that are not necessarily things that we record and are evaluated on in our traditional work. So articles in professional magazines, blogs. This is my hashtag for my studies with OPC. Newspaper interviews and radio. And then working with an intermediary. So this would be presentations with the OPC membership. In our public launch, we had a news release here at Western and OPC. The posting of the report on both my profile page and also on actually OPC's page. Now, using some of the information communication technology. I use Twitter mainly. I have other colleagues that use Facebook mainly. And it depends on what your audience or your end users or your stakeholders use the most. And I am developing LinkedIn because I think there's some areas there where you can make some connections. And, oh yes, and my researcher signature. So, and then one of the other outcomes, which is not necessarily tangible, is ongoing partnerships. So since that study, there's, I've now done a study of vice principals with the Ontario Principals Council, and I continue to use their communication. And again, I continue to use their media campaign and also other various mediums with them to continue my research agenda. And that's because it's taken time to build trust. And that doesn't mean that takes time.
Yeah, even after the study was completed, KMb continued. This is just some examples here. So we can move on to the next one, I think. Just keep track of time here. And again, we're going to talk about research impact. And that's really KMb Impact, because if you take a look at the SSHRC Development Grant final report that we have to submit to SSHRC, it talks about impact, and some of that is around knowledge mobilization, although they don't call it mobilization impact. And not only impact, but evaluation, and that is one of the things that people think the least about, but also requires resources, both human resources, skills, and also some hard resources like purchasing of licenses for particular things. So we'll talk about that in a second, but this is where I wanted my research to have an impact, or my research and the body of research that my research informs. That's policy, practice, and advocacy. Evaluation indicators. I divided these up. You will see Melanie Barwick has a really great article where she talks about evaluation, and she works with sick kids, so it's from a science, scientific science health background. One of the slides I've sort of taken it a little step further for the audience, which is a research community. Not that Melanie's not a part of a research community, she certainly is. So reach indicators. These are indicators that that I was asked, so what? Where's this all going? Why are you spending time on it? What evidence do you have? So these were just some examples of reach indicators, and by no means are they the only examples. And then the next set of indicators is usefulness and practice change indicators. So the Ontario Principals Council used the information to inform their professional learning. Various boards used it to change some of their policies. And we'll go to the next one. And use indicators. Usefulness and use are similar but two different things. So the Ontario Principals Council wrote a letter and made a public statement to the provincial government about some of the things that they thought that the government may want to consider in light of the research findings from the study. And an example from this public letter is that they wanted the government to support these positions in schools and school systems. And they used the study as an example of some of the local evidence to support this in their advocacy. Now, that they also cited other studies in the UK, Australia, and in the US. So just to be clear about that. But this would be an example of use indicators. Another is, as an academic, you might want to know, well, you don't really care about that because that might not feed into your annual performance evaluation and all those kinds of things. But there were other ways. I have since been asked to write, be an editor for a special issue, and I've written in a number of special issues because of this study. Okay, so partnership indicators. This may not be applicable to everybody in the room, so Kelly said, make sure you go to this one. So if those of you that are applying for partnership grants, one of the things that is clear, even for the SSHRC Insight grant, when they ask us to consider collaboration, that it's not just a piece of paper where it says some organization says, yeah, we think this is a great study, and we support, Bill, here's your letter, and then nothing ever happens. It's the idea that there is some kind of interaction and relationship, and that it's demonstrated in the application, but also in the report that you send at the end. And you also talking about how the knowledge mobilization strategies have brought awareness. So I asked the Ontario Principals Council to write a summary for me on how the research has impacted their work. And I will continue to do that. I didn't initially do that because I hadn't really thought of that as being a way to show some kind of impact or evaluation. So that's all great. That's all pie in the sky. Great work that I had to do in addition and with my research and for that study. What I realized was that there were a lot of resources that were required. I didn't have all of those resources when I started out. In reflection, these were the things that I needed. And these are things that I've continued to think about, from my SHRC Insight Development Grant to the 2 SHRC grants that I have now, to any other research that I do. And that is, there needs to be funding connected to knowledge mobilization. And some of that included research assistants, hiring research assistants to help me, statistician, social media specialists, but also utilizing the resources that were available with the intermediaries which I work with. There are budget implications, and this is very applicable to SHRC grants, no matter what SHRC grant it is. One is utilizing existing resources where possible, but it's also talking about them in the application to say, so that you're demonstrating that you're not recreating the wheel. So the example that's often given is, we need not make another website. There are lots of websites out there that are dead in the water and are doing nothing, right? There are lots of organizations and intermediaries that already have an interactive, finely tuned, common website that's getting lots of movement. The idea is to hop on to that and work with the people so that your information is shared through that avenue. That people don't know that reading the grant or reading the application if you don't share that, right? Sometimes people just forget about it. They say, oh yeah, I'm going to do that, but don't necessarily see the value of including it. Not only hiring our administrative assistant to do the study, but also to write the report. So for the Ontario Principals Council, I wrote a report, a public report, to which that was negotiated in our research contract. And I don't necessarily need to do that for my own research expectation here at my faculty, but I did that as my own way to share the findings, also for transparency, also so that you'll see in a minute when we talk about challenges, all research is political, and these were some of the things I've learned through the world of hard knocks and things that are best to do. Yeah, so okay, so, and also I should say the very bottom one, making an article open access, and the reason why I say article, because it cost me $5,000 to just have one of my articles open access, so I just didn't have any more money. So thinking about that open access is definitely something that SHRC is looking for, and is a part of budgeting, absolutely. Knowledge mobilization challenges, time, and competing priorities. And so time in the sense that when we all get up in the day and do our work, there are certain things that are going to give us a bigger bang and buck, and others that we have to work on that will be a bigger bang for our buck later. And when we have our teaching, our service, and our research, and the things that we are evaluated on in our work from our annual performance evaluation, some of the other things that need time, like building your social media presence, gets moved, right? Or updating your picture on your Twitter account. Virginia's still waiting for my updated bio that I promised her 6 months ago. Actually, I think I might get it to you.
Okay, great.
I was working on it this week because I knew I was going to see it. As you can see, competing priorities, right? But also politics around research. And you're working with an intermediary. You may be working with the provincial government, the municipality, maybe working with another researcher and another faculty. The big thing that we have found in our research and working with the Knowledge Network is that it takes time to build trusting relationships and building a rapport. And that might mean having 10 coffees over 6 months and nothing is necessarily tangible, but what might be really meaningful and of usefulness is that relationship and rapport that you're building up. And that's really important because those things we don't like. I like to put in my annual performance evaluation. So I had 20 coffee meetings with, and I can so many this group, this group, this group. But those things are not necessarily valued, but they certainly take time. They take time and they take effort, but they are so worth it in the end for so many reasons. So unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm not sure, at the time of the Ontario Principals Council study around principals, the provincial government was also doing a study around principals. So there was some tension going on there. So at one point, I was actually invited to Queen's Park to talk about the study that the Ontario Principals Council was doing because there was some concern from the provincial government. So, of course, I'm thinking, hey, I'm just a researcher. I might be able to go do this. So I really relied on the Ontario Principals Council to give me advice about, why this might be happening. Should I go? Should I not go? What should I bring in? How should I bring it in? All of those kinds of things, which it was a world I had known nothing about, nor necessarily thought that, I was just a researcher. But that's not necessarily the case all the time. The other thing, remember I talked about a public report? One of the things that our ethics office will be concerned about is when working with other partners that are not necessarily academic institutions, the use of findings, how they may be used, so that if people feel that there is some kind of financial connection to it, that there may be an opportunity, and I'm not saying that this is going to be anybody here or anything like that, that there may be an opportunity for findings to be presented in a particular light. So what I have found for me and how I work through that is that I always share things when working with partners to say, I'm a researcher, and I'm going to do the research, and I'm going to say, this is what we have found, and I'm going to present it in a public document. Now, what you choose to do with that after is your decision, but don't expect me to not present particular information, and suspect that it's being kind of changing the data or any of those kinds of things. To which, usually, if the poor Bill, they're horrified to hear me even say that, that they would think that I would think that they were going to do that. But, it has to be out there and clear. And I also say that because I have been in situations where reports have been held up, I kid you not, for 18 months, around and around and around, to where I have said, I am walking away from this meeting, I am publishing this, as in like putting it on my website, as is, I am not changing anything, and I'm sure you can understand why. This is the conversation we had 3 years ago. Those things happen because for others, there are high stakes around all other kinds of things that we know nothing about in their organization, be it the provincial government or be it a professional association. Can we just go back one more? Mm-hmm. Very quickly. Also, finding the right people to do the work and expertise. And the reason why I say that is because we are really in research, in education, we're on the cusp of a place where we have a supply and demand issue. We have a demand for people who know something about the field, who have expertise around social media, so they can help us fulfill our goals around knowledge mobilization, and the gap is huge. There are people who are learning all about social media and lots of programs in the province across Canada, but they don't know education. And then there are people who know education, who are teachers, all of those kinds of things, but then they don't have the skills around social media. And we're really lucky, we have Virginia, who actually did her teacher education program here, who taught, and taught overseas as well, and knows the education system, and also knows social media, and we've continued to work and build skills together, because it's always changing as well. That's the other thing. It is difficult to keep up, and constant professional learning. There needs to be funding in the grants for whoever you hire around social media, because if they're not keeping up, they'll be left behind. And that might be just weekend workshops that happen every now and then. They have all sorts of virtual pop-up shops and all sorts of things. I don't know, Virginia, if you want to talk to that a bit.
Sure. Even free webinars, often social media platforms will host free webinars that are great for learning. Even if you think you know everything, you don't know what you don't know. So going into the webinar, you may only pick up one or two things, but those might be really important. So any of those workshops or free webinars that we can attend. And then even sometimes when you attend a conference, they'll have a social media component as well. So attending the pre-conference for that has been really helpful as well. So any opportunity, even if you think, oh, I think I already know this, I would suggest taking advantage of it.
I learned something new this week. Like we constantly, of course, when I learn, I'm like, oh my God, I should have known that 6 months ago. But of course, again, it's prioritizing time and effort. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Enough of me talking. Thank God. Hallelujah. Okay. So now, building a knowledge mobilization plan. So what we thought we would do is work with you folks and thinking about what hypothetically a knowledge mobilization plan might be for you. So in your folder is, on the left-hand side, is this sheet. And you started the first piece of it. And we're going to work through some of this in the continued presentation.
And I also just wanted to point out now, in the folder on the other side, there are a few tip sheets on mobilizing knowledge as well that may be useful as you're working through it.
Yes, absolutely. And I just, while you're getting this sheet out, I just wanted to read from the Connection Program and Insight Program their mission. So one of the descriptions of the Connection Program, the goal of the Connection Program is to realize the potential of social sciences and humanities research for intellectual, cultural, social, and economic influence, benefits, and impacts on and beyond the campus by supporting specific activities and tools that facilitate the flow and exchange of research knowledge. So we're hoping that we will be able to share some ideas and thinking that will help to, if any of you are creating a connection grant, and I think some of you actually may have them here, that would be great. You can also share your experiences. Also in the Insight program, it says, such research enhances our knowledge and understanding of the past, present, and informs our thinking about critical social, cultural, economic, technical, and environmental issues, both within the research community and across the public, private, and not-for-profit sectors. And you'll see in the indicator, the IDG final report, it says at the top, this information may be used, I think it was in, what did it say, in the caucus, public something or something else. So you can see there, you're literally saying, whatever you write in the final report is connected, they're going to share it with the public. So I thought that was quite useful. What the project found on the SSHRC grants. So if you were thinking about some of the language that you may use in your application this year, next year, the following year, some of this language here can be included in the summary of the proposal and the detailed description. We also, wanted to talk about goals. What could you accomplish through knowledge mobilization that you may not be able to do through traditional dissemination? And this relates to the expected outcomes in many of the grants. So in the grant applications, if you've been fortunate enough to look at any of them and fill any of them out recently, you will see in the outcomes section there is a pull down. And in some of those pull down options, there are places where you can infuse some of your knowledge mobilization goals. The reason why I'm sharing this with you is because after adjudicating the SSHRC Insight grants this past year for social sciences and education, it was clear that many people had a really great, half of the applications, when I did like 75, had a really great knowledge mobilization plan, but it was absent anywhere else. So I left thinking, well, where else would we might want to think about having some of that? And I'm not saying my knowledge mobilization goal should be written in the plan, but what the essence of your goal should be visible in the plan throughout. Is what I'm trying to convey here. So these are some examples of some of those goals, and some of those can be connected to the check the pull-down options under the outcomes in the SSHRC application. Now, we would like for you to take a moment to list 3 potential knowledge mobilization goals for your research. And if you are supporting somebody's research, as in if you are a research officer or if you're with one of the centers, please think about one of the initiatives that you're working on or you've been recently working with, and we'll give you a couple of minutes.
Sure.
So, I applied for this development recently and wasn't so successful. But one of the things that thank you. That's not the reason I'm asking you question, but one of the things that I found with the whole knowledge mobilization piece, and I'm really enjoying this presentation, what was that with the new body of research, it really is like so hypothetical, that you're saying, this is the outcome of this research, and, I'm going to do all these wonderful things for people. So I see the value in this, but I think it's far easier if you're building on research that you already have, as opposed to a new research.
So it comes to who is your audience currently right now. And your current audience may be other academics. And might be thinking about how you might want to share that. And that's, for me, personally, as an academic, that's A-okay. Because we need to think about our research agenda 3 years down the road, 5 years down the road, as we keep going. So if it's emergent and you think that who you want to contact and share with is beyond, it may be academics, but it might just beyond the peer review. Because as you know, particular databases favor particular publications in particular countries. You know that there's some work that can be done to connect using some knowledge mobilization strategies. But the end user might actually be another academic in another country, speaks a different language, all of those kinds of things. But yeah. Does that help? And I mean, this is just one example. We have theoretical mathematicians on main campus who have blogs and tweets and have a huge following, and they make connections to a number of different kinds of end users, and they're, theoretical mathematics. I was thinking, so Virginia's like, another Minnesota, I'm thinking, yes, maybe, but I also know if you're an academic like me, if you're finished, you're probably then writing it in your grocery list, or your to-do list, or you have to talk to students, or you're checking your email, so I always have to be cognizant that just because your head's done. So if you, can I move on? I guess is what I'm asking. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, so we want to talk about stakeholders. I know that we just talked about Sorry. Your knowledge mobilization goals. And the reason why we're moving to stakeholders is because your knowledge mobilization goals will influence the stakeholders that you're interested in connecting to. On one of the knowledge mobilization projects we worked on, at one point we were so focused on practitioners that we forgot about researchers. But the first little while, it really was about practitioners, and it really wasn't about community researchers. And then somebody pointed out and said, well, I think it's time now we start thinking about our other audiences. So the goals that you've written down, or info form, or that you've been thinking about, I'm wondering if you can think about who the stakeholders are that would be the recipients of the goals that you have. And this is also important for people who are applying for partnership grants and the connection grants. And stakeholder might not be the ideal word either. We always say we've been trying to create these slides for a long time, and we keep going back and forth about labeling things. Stakeholders, is it not stakeholders? Because stakeholders has a particular connotation. It's more accessible in particular fields than others. So, just know that this is coming from a particular discipline. For some clients, for others, it's patients, for other researchers. And I also wanted to point out, too, that in one of the SSHRC applications that I adjudicated with 7 or 8 other people, the applicant talked about, in the knowledge mobilization section, about being a member of a particular medical association. But never shared any of that previously in the application. So, one of the great things might have been having an advisory board that's set up in the first year when you're talking about the description of the study, maybe an advisory board. Or even talk about that some people from that advisory board might be contacted to provide some feedback on, the survey instrument, or any of those kinds of things. But also, that association probably itself has a website. It probably shares data. It probably does all those kinds of things without person could have utilized the communication strategy that exists for that national, very large professional association. But that wasn't shared anywhere through the description or even in the knowledge mobilization piece. It just mentioned. Let me back that up. We're talking about the part about person's past experience. It was mentioned that this person was a part of the board. And so we had a discussion and said, that should have been in the knowledge mobilization piece, that could have been brought into the description. We're also thinking about the other thing you'll see in the report is that there's intention that one will, or a group of people, or the collaboration will continue to do research. So the idea that there are stakeholders, brokers, intermediaries, partners, and groups involved kind of gives a sense that they'll keep moving on after the funding is died. And so I think SSHRC is interested in knowing that, so that these things are not one-off and it has a long-lasting impact on some kind of social change. That's the goal. So after thinking about it, also it's partners and stakeholders are not necessarily the same thing. This is one of the things that Kelly wanted me to share with the group. They can be, but not necessarily. So sometimes there are partners that are involved in a funding application. They may be a partner because they they provide some kind of skill or specific skill, knowledge, or expertise to help the study unfold. But they may not be a final stake, they might be a stakeholder, and they might not be a stakeholder that is influenced by the findings. So these are important subtle distinctions that people should consider about when they're writing the larger grants. And also sometimes those partners are not, and stakeholders may not be involved from the very beginning to the very end. They may be involved in different places in and out throughout. So, we asked list 5, my target audiences. Okay, perfect. So my statement has come out, so I apologize. I'm just trying to, there we go. So project partners. I think I've covered that one. I'd like for you to now, on your sheet, think about some partners or potential stakeholders to whom you may do your research or your research agenda may eventually be connected to. So I know, Brent, you have a number of connections that could be partners or stakeholders, and they may not necessarily be a part of any research right now, but they could eventually be or support some of the research work that you do. And I know, Jackie, you also have a partnership grant at the moment too, right? No, you applied for one. But you have multiple partners through your center and also through the NAIR network that you're a part of. Yeah. And would you say that some of them have different roles than others?
It depends on, committees are more community groups or school boards or other researchers.
Yeah. And some of you might just feel rhyme goes off right now because you work with them all the time, and others of you might want to think a little bit more. Which group or specific number from the stakeholder group would be a good project partner? I'm assuming anybody you write down will be a good project partner. So this was very clear as well. In my applications, short applications, I asked the partners that I work with, the intermediaries that I work with, to write a letter of support and to include it in the grant. And I'm not sure that's voluntary anymore or whether that's mandatory, but I felt that was really important. And I didn't just say write a letter. Be specific, I didn't write the letter for them, but I was specific and said, you need to say why you're writing the letter, that you had a long-standing history, that there's a connection, how you may use the research, all of those kinds of things, so that the readers can see some of the flow around this connection and working with, rather than your research on groups and people. So, in what ways can your partner participate in Mobilize Knowledge? These were some of the ways that we know them through the knowledge mobilization work we do for provincial networks, and that is provide access to stakeholders, utilize communication channels, data analysis and review, and championing the research. So I know that we asked you to write down who you think are great partners. The idea now is to think about why. There's some ways that they can be great partners to you. This is also the time part. Sometimes there are partners that are not going to be great partners, and you have to figure out in what way. This peak effects one. So these lists also were, so Kelly and I went through the various applications, and we felt that There's, on the connection grant and the partnership grant, they ask how participants, the partners can be involved. This is definitely applicable for the partnership applications and thinking about how partners can be involved. And then there's a question about their role. And the reason that that was included is because in the partnership grant, it asks what kind of structure, governance structure is there going to be in the partnership? And who's going to play what role in what kinds of ways? And we included this in here because that's one of the things that if you have not applied for a partnership grant and you're thinking about that, these are some of the things you need to figure out. You know, how will decisions be made? And I don't want to speak to my own personal experience. I applied for a partnership grant a couple of years ago on the last minute block. So how decisions being made, I'm coming up with some kind of story about how I think decisions are going to be made. I didn't talk to any of the partners about that. I didn't know if that was going to happen or not. And if I got the partnership grant, I was going to have to do a lot of work in figuring out how that was going to happen. But I hadn't really thought of that necessarily. I just knew I want to bring these people together. There was a researcher in Australia who spent a number of years on a particular instrument I wanted to use in Canada, and I wanted him to be involved, and he was a partner. And then I had other intermediaries that were practitioner associations, and I had no idea how they were all going to come together. They all come together, fight, not get along, or whatever. But I hadn't had time to think about those things ahead of time, to probably even pre-plan and pre-organize. They all knew about the partnership. I invited all of them, but I hadn't really talked to them in depth about any of those kinds of things because it wasn't really on my radar at that time. But it certainly was after, and these are things that you might want to preempt before writing your application, so that you know you're not writing a story that you hope comes together. Which I'm not saying that I wrote a story, but so. What I'd like for you to do right now, because you've been sitting for a fair bit of time, I know, like, it's long, and I want you to turn to someone at your table, and I want you to think about what your message is going to be. We're going to do this in a moment. So, this has been an ongoing struggle for us with one of our knowledge mobilization initiatives, and that is the message, making it actionable and not a specific finding. And I'm guilty of that. When I first got my findings, I was taking that finding. I was filling my Hootsuite account, all stacking them up. And they would come out, every day, 2 of them, whatever. And I'm thinking, I'm the cat's meow, because I'm doing that. What I realized after was that really that was, great information for a little bit of time, but it didn't get much bang for the buck. And that really the message had to be actionable. And it had to really try to connect with people. And so I really, in some ways, released it. And it should be about ideas and not data. It should be broad, and it doesn't have to be important to practice. That was for my study. But it needs to consider what you want stakeholders to do. So, I want people to think about changing behavior and how they cope with wellness and stress at work, how it can impact policy, improve practice, and create awareness. Those are the things that I was thinking about. So in your message, we're wondering if you could take some time and share with your neighbor next to you 3 different messages to, hopefully, 3 different stakeholders, or not. And what we'll do is we'll flip back to the slide, the previous slide, so that you can, these can be some of the parameters you might want to think about. So in talking about the academic on main campus who does theoretical math, one of the principles of thinking about is trying to make math fun, make math clear to people, to encourage people to be involved in math. So that would be one of the bonding aims and goals. So his blogs, his Twitter account and his Facebook account appeals to those things. And so he creates problems and solutions that engages the reader. In the short grant application, it says, you have, expected outcomes. These things can help, when you're thinking about what the message may be, these things can also, contribute to your expected outcomes section, or vice versa. They should coincide, they should match onto each other, or else you're making additional room for yourself. Please share with your colleagues, or not. Don't be quiet, something on there. Not engaged, tired, or just
Or thinking, yeah.
Or thinking, that's
Yeah.
right. So I would say, you're not gonna nail down your message today in a couple minutes. Our messaging takes, we go over it multiple times, and it takes us a long time to get messaging bang on. But I would like you to share, with your colleagues, just some thinking about what you think the beginning of your message.
And then go from our presentation to the website.
This is the monitor.
Oh, there's track then.
Yeah, just
Escape.
escape.
Okay, then it's just regular. Okay.
Yeah, and then you can go to the website in here. Oh my goodness.
Internet Explorer.
I like that.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Just wait
Okay.
a second. Minimize that one. Go in Google,
Chrome.
Firefox.
Okay, and then I want to close Spotify. 'Cause it's
Oh, that's one actually. I don't know who opened this one.
not-
Just Spotify. We don't have it. And I'm gonna unpin it also from here.
Yeah, why is it seems bizarre for this computer?
That's I guess what's her name? She's teaching. Virgin, despicable me, please. Despicable me.
Yeah. Katina, do you just want the Knowledge Hub in total? Just, okay. Sure. Do you want me to leave it on this for now or back to the slideshow? Yeah, we're good. Thank you. That was easy.
You're gonna use your message in a minute for something else, so hopefully. Hopefully, try to do something.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. The worksheet. Do you want to?
Okay. So, thank you, everyone. I know that you probably still have not finished, some of you talking about your message or messaging. What we have found in our 7 or more years in non-mobilization, my 7 or more years, Virginia, 2 years, but is that sometimes well-intended people also have lots of strategies how they're going to send out information, but they haven't been quite clear about what their message is. I was in a meeting last night, somebody said, well, I got an email, it was encrypted. It was, if you have any issues with the issue we were having last week, please let us know. I don't know what the issue was last week, so I don't know about that issue. I sort of chuckled to myself as we were going to do the presentation today. So, by no means do I expect you to have your messaging for your various audiences or partners down pat right now. But I just wanted you to think about that a bit, because the other thing is thinking about products and strategies. Remember, it's strategux or something. I don't know, we'll call it something. But anyway, what you will be asked to do eventually, either, or you will have to do anyway, in your research and working with other academics or with other partners, is that you'll have to think about what format is best suited for mobilizing that knowledge, and what methods of dissemination best suit the format and information. And most importantly, how does your stakeholder access information? Consider location, language, and format. I kid you not, there are people who do research in that area. And there are in the health field, there are people who do research in figuring out how do patients take up information. How do doctors take up information? How do nurses take up information? And in education, how do teachers take up information? And in FIMS, there are people who study that. It's also part of the library information communication work. And if one is not sure, then a reason to get an RA to start looking at that. And some of our project partners over the year have had to start with that. They're like, this is what we know, there's a body of research to support this, but we're not sure how to get it to the people that we want to share it with. And they've actually had to backtrack and say, you know what, we really had to start here and start with a scan, an assessment, and find out how people actually are accessing information. I will tell you, for principals, they do Twitter, they often don't do Facebook. We've done work around teachers, and what has been our response? It's been mainly...
Yeah, well, I think teachers use both Facebook and Twitter, and I think there has been a bit of a shift in the last couple of years to Twitter. When I was a student teacher here at Western, all social media was very frowned upon, whereas now there's been a bit of a shift, and teachers do actually use Twitter for Twitter chats and connecting with resources. The Global Read Aloud is something that they connect with a lot on Twitter, and then Facebook as well is used for different groups.
But some groups don't use any of those. You can be using social media at all. There'll be other kinds of things. Sometimes it's connecting, if you're working with community groups, sometimes it's literally connecting with a physical community group where you post things and put things together in hard copy. So those are things to think about. Also, for those of you who are targeting larger networks, this would be for the connection grants and partnership grants. One of the things about targeting your audience is thinking about building partnerships with, you can fill it out, creating networks such as Mobilize the Research through
these would be some of the stems and phrases that you would be thinking about. And some of you already actively do that, and in some situations, it may be extending partnerships with. So there may already be existing partnerships and thinking about if you're national but being international, or if there's only going national, or if you think there's a field that has been omitted or left out. That's one of the things I'm thinking about. And these are things that we have been faced, particularly in some of our work in thinking about well-being has included mental, physical, social, cognitive health. So that often brings in this, the science, the medical sciences, which is not, they've always been involved in education, but probably we've been looking at it in different kinds of ways than now. So some active strategies are professional development, workshops, conferences, targeted outreach. Passive strategies is one-way dissemination of information. And that tends to be the easiest, but also it's going to be the least bang for the buck. And the other thing is you don't necessarily know how that information is taken up. You know, you can have pamphlets in a doctor's office, and I might use it, I don't know, put my chin down there and throw it in the garbage, right? You know, it was useful, but the content on it wasn't. You know what I mean? So that's one of the inabilities in thinking about your impact. It's very difficult to measure at times. So on your paper, we're going to ask you to think of one strategy that you can utilize for one of your messages. So in the messages you just wrote a minute ago, or you may want to put more. I want you to think about a strategy that you could use to get that message out. What products would be part of that strategy? Whose support will you need? And consider who the message is for, and how they might access this information. And what level of language is required. So this will be on the next page. That's what are they numbered? Page 4. Page 4, KMb Products and Strategies. And while you're flipping to that page, Virginia is going to pull up NARE, the Knowledge Network for Applied Education Research. This is only one example, but on the NARE website there are examples of some strategies that can be used. We have in your folder, we also have examples of practical tips for Mobilize Knowledge. You may want to take a look at those. Or 10 tips for building and sustaining effective knowledge, or effective networks. We call them knowledge mobilization networks. There are also best practices and Twitter tools here. There may be some ideas throughout here that may be useful to you in thinking about some strategies. And Virginia, if you wanted to do, some people might be thinking about, we have the Knowledge Hub on their website, but we also have the Ontario Education Research Exchange that collects and distributes 3-page research summaries, which is also another different kind of knowledge mobilization strategy. You want to speak to any of those?
Sure. So we have a few different items on our website that we use. So we do have a knowledge mobilization blog where experts in the field contribute once a month to our blog, and then we disseminate that across our social media channels and through our listserv. We also have a hub, so we call it our Knowledge Hub, and it has a few different components to it. But we have education resources where some of our information is displayed specifically for educators. We have knowledge mobilization resources, which is its own component in there as well. And then we have some resources for research and evidence as well. So we have a hub where we sort of gathered all of these different tools for various individuals. And then as well on our website, we also included links to our Twitter and Facebook accounts. We have an e-news sign up as well so that people can subscribe and get our newsletter. We do publish a newsletter quarterly, so that's another avenue that we've used to reach our audience.
So these are just some examples of some activities that could be part of a larger strategy. So that is research summary, blog writing, tweeting, Facebook, LinkedIn. We have not utilized. I have utilized more as an individual researcher rather than, say, NARE, because NARE has a different audience and different focus. a sign up for newsletters, our narrative, blogging. Those are some of the social media strategies, but also others that are not necessarily connected to social media would be things like creating an ebook. Well, this one's connected to social media, that would be Twitter chat, but also lesson plans if you are into, if your researchers are teaching and learning. Others have been workshops that are interactive workshops that are ongoing or workshops that are online. Some are webinars. I don't know, Arnie, you want to add this one? Probably that you-
You've done the same sort of stuff with them.
Yeah.
Blogs, podcasts is a new one.
Podcasts, yeah.
Mhm.
Vlogs. And, you know, it's also publishing in professional magazines. The thing, the key though around all of that, and I have a presentation I did for the ED students last year, that you can do all those things and it can still be kind of disparate. And if you like, this is a non-law, you can be like, oh my gosh, I have to do all those things. But really, what I have done as an individual researcher is that I have published a piece, I've taken that and taken one finding and have written that as in a professional magazine. I've taken a part of that and I have written it as a blog, and part of that I have then taken and used actionable items as in my Twitter account. And then also, in addition to the peer review piece, I do a 3-page summary to which I send to the LRE, have them upload, and it's public for people. So you get to see how like one piece of writing can help you think about other ways. And then, of course, in the professional magazine, I cite my peer review piece. And then in my blog, I cite the professional magazine, the peer review piece. In my Facebook piece, I cite the blog, the 3-page summary, the professional magazine, and the peer review piece. Because they all have a different focus. It's not, the message might be a little bit different, but it's all about the same piece of research. You understand where I'm coming from. And then, of course, when I'm tweeting about all of those things, and I'm trying to drive people to look at all of these pieces. That's the plan. That's the whole strategy. That doesn't happen in one day. That doesn't happen in 1 month, 1 term. That's like a 12-month process right there. And then of course, in being strategic, you don't just leave say I publish a 3-page summary in September 2017. I might revisit that September 2018 as, like a throwback Thursday thing or an anniversary or a year ago I published blah, blah, blah. Because there's still some really great information there. And in that time, I have probably increased my followership on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. And they may have never read it before. Others may have seen it and said, oh my gosh, pushing that out again. That's okay. But do you see how the cycle grows in building followers and interactions? And then I've had people, direct message me on Twitter and say, we're doing a study around suspension expulsion as well. We can't wait to hear what the findings are. And, we really want to share with you. Those are all the hidden nuggets that are very beneficial for academic researchers and connected, particularly in our busy lives. And so, and of course, NAIR has a website. I don't have a personal website. I have our faculty webpage, which I try to hyperlink every one of my publications, so that I also try to drive people to go to that website, because it's free. We have it. We're expected to use it. So why would I spend more money on creating a separate website? Although I would say having a separate website does have its advantages, because I have way more control. So there's a cost-benefit analysis there you have to take in and think about. And also the other thing is I'm not that well versed in web design. And that's the other thing. I've had to figure out what skills I'm really great at and others that I'm not. So Facebook, not that good. I've had professional learning sessions around Facebook. Facebook is I don't know, it might be for people who have addictions. I'm just sucked in, and then I don't know where I am. And then I just caught reading for an hour later, and I'm like, oh, I'm supposed to be doing something on this, and I'm just reading it. I'm a lurker, not in a bad way. I'm a lurker on Facebook. So Let's see, so I'm gonna stop talking. I want you to think about, because I've just explained some of my strategies and things. I want you to think about the message, who you're trying to drive that to and with, and how you might get there and what that might look like. Just, please. So Virginia's pointing out the time, so I'm just going to interject. I think Joan is probably writing right now. But knowledge mobilization process and timeline, this is connected to SHRC. And also your research, thinking about when knowledge mobilization is a part of your research cycle, from conception to completion and beyond. And thinking of it that way, when writing the description, the 5-page description or whatever for the SHRC Insight Development, SHRC Insight Partner or Connection, there should be places where you could underline some of the language that's connected to knowledge mobilization. Also, just a reminder, knowledge mobilization is about knowledge mobilization is not about creating one-offs or one-time events. Each activity should build on the previous, and every strategy should be connected. This creates greater engagement with the research findings, body of research, and with stakeholders. And we found this with some of the initial projects we worked with many years ago, where everybody's having a workshop, and they have workshops, and then the things we have after that. And we were like, well, include your workshop in your research in the sense that you share a workshop, but there might be there may be outcomes from that workshop. So you would continue to work on that, maybe in a virtual thing. Maybe 6 weeks later, you have a virtual session where people come together and they talk about something you may have shared in the workshop, whether it worked or not, and receiving some feedback. That can help you to then write a blog. Do you see where I'm going with this? And then have other people connect, and then engage in the strategy and plan you have. This will help your research in the sense of promoting and keeping people motivated and interested in your research, but also for participants and also for your own self in thinking about where your research is being used and other things that you may not have, but that you might need to do research on. So my study led me to thinking about well-being for principals, and it had nothing to do necessarily with the actual study. It was launching the survey and having more than 45 emails come back into my account, and my Western account being frozen because Western IT thought it was hacked. That's the first thing. But all of these bounce backs were people who were away on medical leave. Then having people who contacted me after and felt comfortable enough to say, you missed the boat on some of the questions. You never asked us about things like being bullied as a principal at work. I never thought of this. I never thought about this. but my findings didn't necessarily talk about those kinds of specific details. But it did talk about work intensification, which I think is connected, which then led to my next SHRC grant. So there are ways that these things are connected. I'm sure the 4 principals that called me to talk about physical abuse that they experience in their schools did that because they felt comfortable calling me and telling me. I just think that all the others who probably didn't feel comfortable doing that, but I also spent a lot of time working with members in that association, so they understood that anything that was shared, was, confidential and those kinds of things, right? And we're not going to share with the membership and the executive or any of those kinds of things. So, in the thinking about where knowledge mobilization may fit, hopefully you will see that these are all the headings of almost all the SHRC grants, and that there are places throughout all of that where knowledge mobilization can be added, thought about, or included, or a kind of language that you can use. So I want to move on very quickly to thinking about, we'll just move on, to the next one, because it's really important. No, we'll keep on going. Impact. So again, Melanie, you have the slides. Melanie Bairos talks about impact and how to measure impact, and that is huge because funders want to know whether it's SHRC or not, what kind of impact and influence you're having, and that's really difficult to measure sometimes, and sometimes really meaningful change takes time and is difficult to measure. But just because it can't be measured doesn't mean that it's not meaningful, and I will always argue that because sometimes we think that's pushback. You should think in your application, thinking about where your impact may be also influences the section on outputs and outcomes, further research. So we'll move on to the next one. We'll move on. So evaluations. These are also on the slide. I'm not sure if it's too small in print, but these are some examples. Reach indicators, which I mentioned some in my study. Usefulness indicators, use indicators. There are many ways that you can think about evaluation. This also connects to your research too, right? Evaluating the value of your research and who are you reaching and who you're not reaching. If you're a part of a partnership group, there are indicators that are published out there for around partnership success and network success. And unfortunately, you're going to have to do that one wrong because I want to get to budget. So, okay, so resources and budget, because I think that's really important because that's that I found in that did the education in SHRC that I was a part of, where apparently the messaging goes that budget is really important, which of course I showed up on my head, we don't care about budget. Lots of talks about budget. And lots of times it's about efficient use of money, but also being fiscally responsible. And that's the two sort of budgeting lenses we came to when looking at the budget. And for knowledge mobilization, there has to be some budget connected to it if you're going to be really serious around knowledge mobilization. Okay? So I'll give you an example. Say in your fourth year you're going to start a Twitter account. I'm going to say good luck to you, don't you bother. Because to build your Twitter following takes a long time, And I mean, you probably would start that in your first year. You might not tweet anything about any of your findings, but you might tweet current research that's in that area. You might try to connect with other researchers in that area. All those kinds of things. But also, you at some point will want to engage in some of the engines and tools that are available on Twitter, which costs money. And the money is going to have to be in your budget, right? And we don't do it too much. We do it once in a while, though, right, with Nair?
A little bit, yeah.
We don't do it a lot because we budget. The other thing is, there are some people who are fluent in social media and can hold down a research agenda. I'd argue they are exceptional people. You really need to have people who are dedicated social media communications, people who are going to be serious about it, because it has to be the connecting. I mean, there are tools. There is, there's Hootsuite, there are, what's the other?
Sprout Social, TweetDeck.
And keep going.
Those are three of the larger ones that are used for scheduling your tweets and planning your content.
The other thing though, scheduling tweets and planning your content is not necessarily engagement. You still have to be on and responding and sharing with others as they communicate. But the other thing is, you also need to measure what's going on. So you have to be able to have somebody who does the analytics, and you also have the software, which also needs a registration and membership, which all costs money. Virginia does Google Analytics for me on a 6-month basis for my own personal. She does it for Nair on a monthly basis. So we see where things are going and what the trends are and how they're changing, because they can change in 4 weeks. They can flip around, okay?
Mm-hmm. And another thing to consider as well is the time that it takes to do all of those items, because you think, oh, I'll just quickly go on social media, but if you really want to make an impact or have get your information out there, it's going to take a lot of planning and a lot of time to actually execute it.
Yes. At one point with Nair, we had 2.5 people. That's for website development, that's for e-newsletter, all of it. Right?
All of it. Mm-hmm.
But we still have 2.5 people. Yeah, what am I talking about? Okay, at one point we had 3.5 people. Yeah, okay, you need people. And those people, you have to pay them, they have to have skills, you have to keep training them. Professional learning has to be included in the budget and also in the description. And also, I want to talk about websites. So one of the examples that was provided in one of the applications was that somebody thought that they were going to develop a website for $900. And maybe a website can be developed for $900. Fair enough. There are open access websites. The other thing is, what's going to happen after? Because I can tell you, they get hacked, they go down, they need plugins, they need support. We have time to do this. We also have
Yeah.
who's our webmaster. So, these are all kinds of things I know nothing about, and I gotta hire somebody else to figure that out. Those are the kinds of resources one needs to think about and needs to be in the plan. This is the mechanics. This is sort of the technical stuff. So, what resources do you think you might need? Anything anybody know?
There's a question.
Yes? Yeah.
It's been really surprising to me on some of the research we've done, Katina, about how hard it is to do like graphic work, and that just visualizing the research to take it to the platforms. Right? And so like the cost that goes into getting, I could stop and learn it myself, but I think it's probably not the best use of my time to do that. And so the cost of hiring someone to do that is also really expensive. So in the last year, I would say for me, the big importance around that knowledge mobilization piece is hiring the graphic specialists to do that kind of work for you, because it's intense.
So
Sometimes you don't even know what they are, right? It's like you get some feedback back that says we can't use visual media in this format yet.
Well, and so have you also, so we also in Ontario or Canada, I guess, have to abide by the
DA.
guidelines. So that influences visuals, that influences website design, and you have to expect to follow them. We're also bilingual country, so often you have to think about 2 languages. You don't speak a second language, you have to have a translator. We use Canva,
Mm-hmm.
and Canva we pay a registration for.
We do. There is a free version, but there are many more benefits and perks to pay for it. So Canva is basically a platform that allows you to create graphics of various sizes. It allows you to create graphics for any social media platform. It allows you to create infographics. It has a large bank of images that you can use, but it also allows you to upload your own images. It allows you to create consistent branding depending on what you're doing. And then you can download those images from Canva to upload to your website or social media or wherever you're headed with that image.
It's just so big, right?
Right. We also have, and that's Canva, that's an interactive for the visuals. We also pay for stock, right, stock images, we have to pay for that because they are often copyright. So that's another payment, that's more finances, and we have to have a person who can do all that stuff, right?
Exactly, and so we've used big stock images where we can download stock images to upload into Canva to create the graphics that we want that are consistent with what we've been doing in the past. So when someone sees our image, we can add our logo and people will know, oh, that's an image from this organization, and they'll recognize it. So it does take, and that's another thing where, time comes into play as well, because it takes time to plan all of that as well.
And I have to say, I saw next to none of those costs. The only cost I saw was a website, that was it.
Absolutely, and I sat on ITG reviews as well, and it was amazing that people, like, when people are thinking about digital representation of the work, it's always the website, and it's actually just, we're gonna create a website that showcases our research, but there were not descriptions about what that looked like, how it fit into the overall project, and yeah, I mean, I can say review committees do read that and question, is this, so you just said you'll do a website, but what about it?
Now, on our committee, there were people who said in the thing that they're going to use their social media, whatever, and people in the committee I was on actually looked at those people's Twitter accounts, their Facebook to see whether they had anything started, right? And if you only have 39 followers and no picture and no description of who you are, honey, it's not going anywhere, don't bother. And these are all skills and knowledge that, it's huge. And there are people, I'm not trying to do a lot of it. Listen, there are other people out there that are doing a lot better than me. It's just finding the finances to support those people and finding the people that are the right fit as well. It's just really important. So I do want to go, I don't want to skip that. Okay. So some potential budget items are these things: holding a workshop, website fees, hiring people, open access. We'll go to the next variable. Yeah, there we go, the challenges. So challenges to knowledge mobilization, resistance. There's sometimes resistance to other academics, resistance to some intermediaries wanting to work together. There are different kinds of ways resistance comes about. The other is access to intended users, competing priorities, as I just mentioned, financial implications, time and skill, and motivation over a long period. Some people need to see tangible results. We're in the long haul here, honey, kind of thing. Knowledge mobilization is working with and co-creating and co-producing with others. And it's a journey, and it's not going to be instant gratification. For me, I have found it to be very rewarding, and I think that it enhances your research as an individual study, but it can enhance the research agenda. And some of my most fulfilling and rewarding events, talks, and those things have been with people who have found it to be very meaningful and have worked to make change in the field. And I think that sometimes in some of your dark moments when you're an academic wondering what's going on, those are the things that pull you through. And I certainly hope that all of you have that experience. If you're a researcher and if you're someone who supports research, that you too are along the ride for this ride and the journey. Now, I've gone over and I didn't ask them any questions. I'm sorry, there's just so much I wanted to share with you. Before you start to eat or any of those kinds of things, because there is food over there on the side for us, I also want you to know, if you are into creating networks or partnerships or thinking about systems approach, I've included 2 published articles that are in your folder. I have a book chapter that's coming out that's also talking about a systems approach, but it's not available yet, so I couldn't share it. These may be of interest to you, and of course, we also, one of the very first pages was a list of resources that you could draw upon yourself. Thank you. Any questions? If you do have any questions, you can ask me now, or you can email me, or we can chat before faculty council and while we're eating. I'm more than.
Thanks very much for that, Katina. I know there are people in the room who are working on CRC applications right now, so they need this component. And a number of people in the room are working on shared insight development grant applications. So there's lots of room to apply the knowledge you share with us. Thank you.
So I'm even closer, normally the person presenting is not. But I don't learn a lot about research, so I apologize for that. Please help yourselves to this.